We are going to take a journey from unsurmountable debt to the golden age of new money. Let's talk about it as we explore. That's right, what I'm about to present to you is a new money revolution as presented by the U.S. Debt Clock, folks. And for those of you who have been following my channel, I used to cover the secret window messages that pop up several times a week, and they've been doing that for a long time now. And I stopped covering those, but nonetheless, this one is very special. Several members of the community pointed this out to me, thought I'd do a video showcasing the new money revolution. And this video is sponsored by SalivateMetal, where you can spin to win, and you can get win a 250-ounce monster box in 2025. Check them out, SalivateMetals.com. So this is pretty fascinating. This is a graphic novel as really, I don't know how else you would describe it. It's pretty cool. We're going to go through it. This is kind of the flow of where we're going to go, but let's get right into it. Let's talk about how the Den of Thieves was formed. It goes back to the Bible times, and Jesus went into the temple of God and cast out all of them that sold and bought in the temple, and overthrew the tables of the money changers. And money changers is the only time that Jesus showed any kind of aggression or physical display of anger in his entire ministry, which lasted 3 years. As the Lord withdrew his disdain for cheating people out of their own money through trickery? No. That's still going on today. The Second Temple in Jerusalem. And today we are witnessing money-changing crime of monumental proportions with the Federal Reserve Sanctuarium. Every day, our labor and life energy is being stolen from us by a system that was designed to transfer the wealth of all working people to a small elite class of money overlords whose only desire is power and control, with nothing to offer but misery and bondage. And that is very true. This is why we can act now by holding gold and silver, even before this new money revolution begins. So let's talk a little bit about the tally system. And this was introduced in about 1100 AD. It's hard to believe that in our technological age, but there was once a time in England that for over 600 years before the formation of the modern banking system, money was counted on tally sticks, perfectly forgery-proof sticks of wood that were split lengthwise for two parties to keep track of financial transactions, mostly taxes. Lost to history, can the tally stick era return? We can see the tally stick fire of 1834 here in this side in this painting. So, yes, we can. We have the technology to create a system that can function as a debt and interest-free money ledger, forever freeing humanity from the fractional reserve banking scheme dreamed up in medieval times, to create an asset-backed currency where the people can once again become the owners of their life, liberty, and property, a structure of currency that eliminates theft and the corruption by the oligarchy. So let's go back to 1694 as we move through this historical timeline about the Bank of England. This is where debt as money was created in 1694. A grand experiment was originated. If money was converted from something of value to a future obligation, a promise to pay, blessed by the government, the world would never be the same after that. Empires cost money. Discipline needs to be maintained along the subjects. From the years 1694 to 1763, England piled up massive debt, fighting many conflicts. Just from 1776 to 1763, they doubled their debt from £75 million to £150 million. The experiment has worked, though. Today, with very few exceptions, the world operates on a promise-to-pay system. Money issued as debt created from nothing. The banks have even gotten the world to believe that the unpayable debt and unfunded compounding interest as a security. Crazy. Now we move to the days of the colonial script. In 1619, here in America, the first colonial paper money was formed. In the Currency Act of 1764, which was a British law, that banned the issuing of paper money in the American colonies and required the withdrawal of existing paper money. The act demanded the payment of taxes owed to the crown in hard currency, gold and silver. The effect was devastating to the colonies, causing a shortage of currency, greatly affecting trade and commerce. They wanted them weakened, however, to do that by punishing them, by making them pay in sound money. And then here we can see an example in this image of pre-war currency. And then Benjamin Franklin in 1793, after the Revolution, we had won it, the colonies would gladly have borne the little tax on tea and other matters had it not been that England took away from the colonies their money, which created unemployment and dissatisfaction. The inability of the colonists to get power to issue their own money permanently out of the hands of George III and the international bankers was a prime reason for the Revolutionary War. Wow, that gives it some perspective, does it not? Well, let's take a look at the history of failed fiat currencies. History is littered with empires that have collapsed for many reasons, but one of the surest ways to destroy a society is to debauch its currency. The Federal Reserve dollar has lost about 97% of its value since its introduction on December the 23rd, 1913. The new USA divided dollar is a revolution in wealth preservation. We'll find out what that means later in this episode. So we can see here what happened in Germany, the Weimar Republic from 1919 to 1923. And then in China, look at that. Argentina's experienced it from 1975 to 1992. All of these, by the way, in the 19th or the 20th and 21st centuries. Russia, we saw it from 91 to 97. Zimbabwe is the most recent example that really sticks out to us. But then, even more recent than that, is what had been going on in Venezuela. So a lot of examples of empires or currencies that have fallen and collapsed. Now, let's talk about the Silver Swindle. The Silver Swindle area here. In the Roman era, what do we see here? We saw debasement from a high silver content from 2270 BC all the way to 280 AD. The silver content was reduced by 40%. And then by the time the empire was close to fracturing from East and West Roman Empire, by 300 AD, it was down to 5% silver. That's it. And then we see what happened in the United States here. We had a silver content of 90%. And then boom, just like that, by 1965, no silver at all. And the silver to gold price ratio, that has increased to about 100 to 1 in recent times. But the mining ratio is at 8 to 1. Silver has been the central medium of exchange for centuries. The big banks know that they must suppress the price to maintain the illusion of value for their fake fiat debt money system to continue. Then we have the Greenbacks, which occurred here. This is an interesting part of history. From 1862 to 1865, the Union, to fund the cause in the Civil War, European banks wanted to charge 24 to 36% interest. Instead, Lincoln printed debt and interest-free greenback paper currency to continue the war. 450 million greenbacks were printed, which is about 8% of GDP. And that's why all of our dollars have a green back on them. That's right. And then we had the Panic of 1873. Several factors converged in the fall of 1873 to create a panic and depression that lasted for years. The two main monetary causes were planned calling in of greenbacks and the demonetization of silver, which contributed to a stock market crisis. So you see how silver was involved in. The Greenback Party emerged out of the financial crisis of 1873 with a simple idea that the government should issue unbacked debt and interest-free money to stifle the influence of the big banks. While having half the equation for honest money in hand, their approach still led to the disaster of the Federal Reserve Act of 1913, which gave us 100 years of servitude. Indeed, it's amazing how quickly things can just spiral out of control. And look where we're at today. Then, let's take a look at this crime of 1873. We can see some references here to the Wizard of Oz. Will work for food, fiat currency, scratches out, or gold, but I prefer silver. There we go. The dollar to silver ratio, we can see that through the time. It's been pretty amazing to see, and that's something I've covered on this channel ad nauseum many times about the dollar to silver ratio. Very important number, maybe even more important than price, to give you an idea of really how valuable silver is as opposed to its price. An ounce of silver for a day's labor. And during a 100-year period from 1773 to 1873, a single ounce of silver paid for the average laborer's daily wage. Today, it would take nearly 10 ounces of silver for a day's wage. The war of the price of silver has lasted 150 years. If only 2% of the world's population bought 1 ounce of silver, the true price of silver would be revealed, which is between 10 to 20% of the price of gold. That's an interesting way to look at it. I do believe that if we were to see that many people, which is a huge number, there's a lot of people that need to wake up to silver. That's one of the reasons why this channel exists. Now let's talk about the Fed debt money dollar. Indeed it is. It is a debt. It's even written on the note itself. The Federal Reserve System was established in 1913 as a master-class financial scheme, an enigma so diabolical and obscure that for over 100 years it has foiled any attempt to decipher its dastardly code of destruction, first conceived, by the way, in 1910 in a place called Jekyll Island. So the Federal Reserve, well, what about it? It's not federal. These founding fathers of deception knew that their plan was a perfect formula to deceive and compromise the politicians of the day, to turn over the keys of the magic kingdom of wealth creation. There's also no reserves, because the plan was to create a Ponzi scheme at the highest level, a never-ending cycle of debt and interest to trap the American people into a life of servitude, to take from the government its sacred duty to coin money and regulate the value thereof. It also creates a hidden tax on us all, for sure. Yes, indeed. It's interesting how these acts and these bills, going back then for the Federal Reserve Act to create something that was not federal, not reserve, look at the legislation that we get out of the Congress today. It's pretty much the exact opposite of the name that is assigned to them. So let's talk about a magic show of money creation that we can see here. The Fed-based money is pretty much a deceptive thing. You look at that here for the deposits and the balances here at the end. It's pretty crazy. This is an illusion, a misinterpretation or deceptive perception of reality. It's got fake fungibility. For much of the last 400 years, the banks, for the complicity of the government, have maintained a carefully controlled illusion that money is fully backed by real-world assets. The truth is that money is nothing more than the promise to pay the fake debt-backed assets on an infinite timeline. Something's got to give somewhere in time, and but so far, no one is going to pay the piper yet. And now we can see what's happening. It's rigged by the banks. From its inception in 1910 on Jekyll Island, the Federal Reserve, along with the fractional reserve banking, was designed to extract wealth from the working class to the unproductive banking class. It was a carefully crafted scheme to skim 20% of all commerce and wealth creation into the hands of an elite few. They knew that if successful, America would be trapped in a debt spiral impossible to escape. From Jekyll Island, we can see here what's happening with the top 1%. The number of billionaires have been formed, and the widening gap between the wealthy, the ultra wealthy, and the rest of us. And then we can see what happened during the Great Depression. Between 1929 and 1933, 9,000 U.S. banks failed. The Federal Reserve flunked in its first test to backstop the Federal Reserve banking system and meant the bankruptcy and unemployment for millions of Americans. For the banking cartel, opportunity, the greatest consolidation of wealth in human history. By any means necessary in the banking world, the motto of the game, extraction of wealth, lending money creation from nothing to buy assets on margin, is a perfect application of this principle. A bait-and-switch margin call is all that's needed to scoop up any asset as for pennies on the dollar. The boom and bust cycle, which is the favorite tool of the banking cartel. We can see here the money supply and what's been happening with it. It's been created all these years. It was insane. Let's talk about the deflating dollar, essentially in slow motion. The purchasing power, 97% drop since the Federal Reserve Act in 1913. And the money supply, boom, rocketing up here, 22 trillion. It's insanity. 1,100 time increase in M2 money supply. So this is the biggest inverse correlation in history, an epic fail on a monumental scale. The loss of the value of the fiat dollar is the worst financial crime ever conceived. Generational wealth stolen in a grand scheme to turn a nation into a land of serfs where a tiny minority at the top benefit from the labor of millions, were hardly a word of scorn until now. And the debt money ripoff continues. We see here, it's hard for people to believe. It defies description and imagination, but our money is issued in debt. Yes, mathematically unpayable debt with interest. The system created in 1913 was rigged by the big banks from the start. It was designed to be reset when it was ground the economy to a halt, when taxes and debt service overwhelmed the ability to pay. The trap has been set, so let's flip the tables on the banks. So this is where it starts to get good, folks, so stick with me here. We can see what's going on: credit card debt, mortgage debt, car loan debt, and we are a debtor nation. Multiple levels of debt stacked on top of each other. And we can see that's the theft of another name, the big Fiat Ponzi scheme here we see. And we knew the framers of the Federal Reserve's goal was to mask the creation of money, that the vast majority of people would never understand how they were being cheated. The power to create an infinite supply of interest-bearing money from nothing backed by debt means in theory, that their crime is ever-increasingly unpayable debt would never be discovered, or so they thought. And then we can see here inflation is really another example of what's going on here. The invention of the word of a cover-up of the biggest crime in human history, the theft of a nation. The proper term is deflation, because when you're dealing with crime, you blame the perpetrator, not the victim. The value of the dollar is deflating thanks to a 100-year criminal scheme implemented by the banks and the Federal Reserve debt money system. Rising prices are not the fault of the producers of goods and services. That's right. And we can see how much things have increased over time, even in recent history. And so we see here what we've got happening with the 20% interest, 0%, the interest, and the definition: money paid regularly at a particular rate for the use of money lent. That's the definition of what interest is. But the actual definition is used in a criminal scheme to steal wealth and subjugate the unsuspecting population. And so our debt is their security. Federal Reserve debt is carefully contrived, a fiction foisted upon the American people by a ruling banking oligarchy. Money created as a debt security bond with interest is a fraudulent tool used to siphon wealth away from the productive to the extractors. And thanks to money created as debt with interest, the Fed banking cartel siphons 20% of GDP each year for shuffling money, the world's largest criminal scheme in the history of the world. And we can see that the elephant is in the room with the total interest paid by the United States, $5.5 trillion per year, 18.5% of GDP, more than all the federal tax revenue per year. It seems unsustainable, right? It's crazy. An upside-down world where people were paying more in interest than they're paying in federal taxes or combined healthcare costs. That's the federocracy that we live in. Wow, staggering. Exactly. Then we have the derivatives, a whole nother section of derivatives here. What's happening? $729 trillion in global currency derivatives. How is it possible to go from zero to $729 trillion in the notional value of currency and interest rate derivatives in just 30 years, when trades can be leveraged from 10 to 100 times and markets can be manipulated to earn massive profits and little risk? It's easy to see how, with almost no oversight, it's a license to steal, as with all banking. In any sport, when players are found out to be betting on their own teams to win or lose, it's a serious offense. In the world of banking, these rules don't apply. Collusion and rigging of markets is the objective of the game, and the new USA divided dollar has a constant money supply and a stable interest rate between 0 and 3%. The rigged derivatives market will cease to exist, and we have a foretaste of what's coming here and what they're proposing. Then we got tariffs. For over 100 years, the world has witnessed the horrors of communism and a dehumanizing effect on civilization, power, control, and expansion by any means. To no one's surprise, this subterfuge extends to economic warfare. How do you stop a nation committed to destroying the economic base of another? Tariffs. Between 1820 and 1913, the U.S. government was mostly funded by tariffs. At just 3.5% of GDP, tariffs could bring in $1 trillion a year of revenue. With the addition of the U.S. dividend dollar counted as revenue of $1.5 trillion, the income tax and corporate tax can be completely eliminated. And some have already been proposing that from within the administration, the Trump administration now. So yes, how do you destroy the greatest nation ever conceived? You kill incentive by taxing income. Why do you tax income? It's the only way that they can fund a Fed debt money Ponzi scheme. The USA Treasury dividend dollar sets America free from this. Yes, indeed. So what really is money? Well, let's take a look at this, and we can see the Fed's purchasing power, the wealth extraction scheme versus the wealth preservation scheme. It loses value every year through inflation backed by unpayable debt owned by the Fed banking syndicate. So we can see here that money that we see here is a unit of measure. Well, a variable supply sure is taxed, designed to lose value, private secret, whereas here, the U.S. dividend dollar purchasing power is 100% ownership of the people. It gains value every year by intrinsic dividend, backed by real-world assets. So it checks these inherent verified with precious metals. It is an asset-backed, a right of issuance, publicly audited. Yes, indeed. It doesn't have any derivatives, and it's not based off of a fraught debt interest. So the abundance of valuable material possessions and resources, all tangible objects, have economic utility, as opposed to the theft model that we're in now, the felonious taking and removing of all personal property with the intent to deprive the rightful owner of it. So we got liberty versus tyranny. We have a free enterprise, citizens free to create boundaries, wealth, and prosperity in a world of plenty through the private free enterprise system. And we can see here state chartered, no ID required, crypto anonymous, and no capital gains tax indeed. And look at there, where it points to gold and silver. There you go, debt-free currency. And then, as opposed to a CBDC prison, which even some of the latest legislation means we might be heading in that direction, they thought they could corral the people into a digital prison. What they don't know is that the date restricted, area-specific, approved purchases, non-transferable, and imprisons using that under the World Bank and Bank of International Settlements. And we have a world debt security, essentially, legal tender, and 100 IOUs, and that's the system that we find ourselves a part of today. Let's make a change for sure. And then let's talk about the big bank squeeze. We got pressure from above from the end of debt money, pressure from below from the end of the fractional reserve banking, and the pressure that we're going to see in the fractional reserve banking cartel. So we need to stop creating debt, deconstruct Federal Reserve operations, replacing the unfunded debt dollars with asset-backed USA Treasury dollars. Hidden assets vastly surpass federal debt, making the transition from debt to wealth unencumbered. And the great banking unwind as fractional reserve banking has a reserve ratio of 10%. As new U.S. Treasury dollars flow into the system, state credit unions will be capitalized, as reserve ratios will be increased on existing Fed-based banks until the transition is complete. So let's talk about this in a full circle. The creators of the Federal Reserve knew in 1913 that the debt money scam was unsustainable. They planned for a world of total control and ownership of all property and means of communications. The Great Awakening was the furthest thing from their minds. Their plan failed. We the people shall restore life, liberty, and property. And we can experience some of that now by holding on to gold and silver. So let's talk about this G money. Government spending at all levels, tracking 40% of every dollar is spent. We can see it goes to political donations, campaign spending, government contracts, and NGOs. What if we the people demanded real-time total accountability from our representatives? How is it possible that a group of elected officials with a 93% re-election rate can spend 40% of our life and liberty with such little oversight? We must continually audit the privileged class of government oligarchs. And there's a beginning of that now with Doge. Doge audit trail traced by House district, traced by individual ID, state and local spending whistleblower rewards with a real-time public ledger. That's a start. But let's talk about devolution. Transference as of rights, powers, prosperity to another. And then also the surrender of powers to local authorities by a central government. That's devolution here. And pretty amazing here. In Canada, we can see what's going on in Florida and North Dakota what's been proposed here, home mortgages, car loans, business loans, credit cards, all between this range of an APR under 50 state credit unions, and get rid of the property tax as well. So the debt money banking syndicate funnels $5.5 trillion a year in interest away from the productive class of the ultra-rich banking oligarchs. Under the new system, interest will be drastically reduced by 80%. State credit unions will direct this money into reduced taxes and infrastructure projects. USA property owners pay $700 billion in property taxes each year. Transferring credit creation from the Fed banking cartel to new state credit unions will enable the states to eliminate property taxes with just revenue from a 3% interest rate on all loans. That is pretty amazing. What a proposal that would be if enacted. So let's talk about this simple plan where we bypass the Fed cartel and into the USA Treasury dividend dollar with 100% reserve. Step 1, sign an executive order stopping the printing of new money and the creation of new bonds by the Fed, guaranteed the repayment of all outstanding U.S. debts. Decrease the interest rate to 0% on new USA Treasury bonds. Then step 2, begin the printing of new USA Treasury dividend dollars, which is equal to 5% of the GDP a year. Spend, not borrow, this new debt interest-free 100% reserve currency into circulation. Maintain a stable plus 5% year M2 money supply. In other words, it's managed, it's based off GDP, and it is something that we could see in a Treasury dividend dollar via the variable asset leveling index. So that would be a minimum 3% yearly value increase. Then the third step is to watch as the world realizes the fallacy of issuing money as debt and the worldwide matrix of control through the Bank of International Settlements and the International Monetary Fund crumbles, and witness a new golden age of wealth creation. Now, there's some hope here. This is where we're going to see a transfer of power to we the people from the money mafia and the stolen wealth and fake money and broken trust to no property tax, no income tax, and no social credit score. And then we're going to see the states make an action where we get rid of credit cards, mortgages, fractional reserve banks, and replace that with home mortgages, car loans, business loans, credit cards at a 1 or 0 to 3% through state credit unions that will replace the property tax. Sounds like a pretty decent model, but I think there's got to be some more specifics. And obviously it's going to take a lot of work to get there, but on the surface it sounds really good. Then we have on the federal level, get rid of the Fed banking cartel, the Fiat Ponzi scheme, and the less than 3% value a year on what they have, and we can get over 3% value a year under the dividend dollar, which is the USA Treasury notes that we see here. So money is going to be reinvented, folks. Own a share of America with your with your debt-free currency. Pretty amazing. Fractional, tokenized, intrinsic real assets backing up this new system, as opposed to corporate capital gains, personal, and then taxes. So we go from a revolution, from a sovereign wealth reserve, a separate unalienable fund owned by the people, ensuring the asset-backed 3% yearly growth in value of the new USA dollar. This new reserve is the exact opposite of the private, secret Federal Reserve based on a debt-backed, deflating in value US dollar. The tokenized sum of total all realized and unrealized tangible USA assets, including assets held by the government. These collateralized assets, not to exceed 10% of any one asset class, will be built on the sovereign wealth reserve as a backing for the US dollar. Pretty amazing. And then we go from debt to wealth in the end, summing some of this up now. We can see debt serfdom to wealth freedom with 10% in precious metals, gold and silver. Yes, indeed. That's great to see. That's at the top of this list here for the new dividend dollar. Amazing. And also mineral resources, real estate, and stock market, and new energy. It's direct ownership of we the people, the sovereign wealth reserve, unalienable asset trust. Wow. I think it's nice. Pretty good idea. How can we get there? That's going to be the big question. But as an idea, as a proposal, I think it's pretty well explained in this in this new money revolution infographic that we see here, the biggest ever that the debt clock has ever produced. In some nation here, the sovereign wealth reserve, we can see here, we the people of the United States, unalienable asset trust there, amazing, like a certificate that explains what this is all about, what could be coming down the pike. A declaration by we the people, in accordance with the power granted to we the people by the Most High God, we assert our right to secure our life, liberty, and property. In doing, we find it necessary to undo the injustice brought upon us by the secret private banking conglomerate known as the Federal Reserve. The Fed has systematically stripped the wealth of our nation and placed it into the hands of an elite few using a carefully crafted criminal scheme dating back over 100 years. While posing as a federal agency, they operated as an unlawful money laundering and racketeering debt and interest exchange that has no actual reserves. Because of the fraudulent nature of their enterprise, we the people seek full reparations and restitution of assets acquired from the inception of this conspiracy to counterfeit the USA dollar. We expect these forfeited assets to be remitted towards the establishment of the USA Sovereign Wealth Reserve, which is exclusively owned by the American people. On this 4th day of July 2025, a new Declaration of Independence by we the people here in the month of July. We declare our independence from the Federal Reserve Bank, and that is where it should go, but we can already do this, and for those of us who have been stacking silver and gold, we've been doing that for many years. We declare our independence with gold and silver. So there it is. A new money for a new America. An amazing thing. I think this is a great infographic by the U.S. Debt Clock people, and I wanted to take the time to share it with you. So I hope you found this video informative, insightful, and educational. I'd like to extend a multitude of gratitude to you all for taking the time to watch, and encourage you to please rate, share, comment, and subscribe.